My name is Evie Betancourt. I am a return volunteer from the Eastern Caribbean. Specifically, I served in St. Lucia from 2017 to 2020 as an education volunteer. I worked as an English literacy specialist for grades 1 through 3. I worked on library development at my school, and I created a library club just to kind of generate that excitement for reading and education outside of the classroom. And I also I worked on developing a news segment with the national local news station to just raise awareness about projects other volunteers were doing in other sites. And I was also a part of 2 committees. I helped find and start up our social media committee and our intercultural competence, diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, also known as ICDEI because it is a mouthful.
I was an education volunteer. I served in the teaching English, leadership, and life skills sector. I worked on helping an agriculture school develop a bilingual program, and I helped develop a course on sustainable development. The purpose of the course was to teach project management skills and civic engagement skills, how to plan a project, but using those goals as the way to do it. And then I also I facilitated a number of future planning and sexual health workshops in middle schools and high schools.
My sector was also English education. I worked at a Moldovan school with kids of all ages, mostly 7-year-olds through 18-year-olds. Aside from our standard English classes, I was involved in a variety of other projects, after-school English clubs, private tutoring within my host community, community development projects. We did, grants and other good stuff like that too. I coordinated with a U.S. Middle school teacher actually to arrange an international pen pal type of exchange, as well as some grant activities. We did 2 Peace Corps grants, one of which was put to building a new computer lab within our school. Another one was for updating the technology in our English classrooms.
My name is Rana. I volunteered in Cameroon from May 2018 through March 2020. I was evacuated because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was an education extension volunteer, but participated and led projects in agriculture and health and wellness.
I remember when I first got the schedule for just like the first week, the days were so long, and I just remember feeling so intimidated by all of the training that was scheduled for us, and it was really intense. But one thing that definitely kind of constantly stood out to me was not having a formal background in education and being an education volunteer. I was so worried that I was really underqualified and wouldn't even be helpful. But the training, it had a lot of the technical aspects that we needed, and it also started to incorporate the cultural things that we needed to know as well. And I was given a lot of the tools that I needed to be ready at my site, and the training definitely also kind of helped us learn how to lean on our counterparts in our communities to fill in the areas where we lack especially, and it definitely kind of just reinforced what we were there to do. And I think beyond like my training, that's why I was motivated to be a part of creating the ICDEI committee, because we wanted to still build upon all the training that we were given and to make other volunteers feel more prepared, even more so than I had felt during my service.
The courses, the training workshops were very intense, very demanding. They required a lot of time. We covered various topics ranging from technical job training, language training, which in our case, our language training, we had like 4 hours of language training in the mornings with 4 hours of technical trainings in the afternoons. So we were all pretty darn exhausted by the end of that. On top of that, there was also like a cultural training and just health and safety training as well. A lot of the logistical and administrative types of seminars we attended. As far as preparation for when I actually got to site, Evie, I connect with you too, in that I didn't feel confident enough. That was my first time in, education as well. I have no teaching background whatsoever. So in terms of the cultural awareness, yeah, I felt like I was prepared in that aspect. But in terms of like the job training and language, to be honest, I felt rather ill-equipped and ill-prepared in that regard, especially with the language. I really feel like we could have done a lot more with language.
I definitely was one of the people who went into Peace Corps with the impression that, you know, I was going to be the person who would bring this knowledge and expertise and worldliness to Panama and make the whole school become bilingual and fix everybody's problems, you know, and reality sets in and you start to realize that me making my own course it was for me, you know, and it's there for anyone to use it. But I suspect that because I wasn't collaborative enough, and I think if I were to go back, I could adapt it in a more collaborative way and work with Panamanians to, you know, share ownership of it, adjust my approach. So I know I'm not giving a very direct answer, but it's like on the one hand, I'm really proud of this course that I developed because I think it's really cool and it's really interesting. And if people use it, then it could, you know, students could learn something from it. But at the same time, I feel like, you know, because of the way that I went about doing it, it wasn't really sustainable. And so the real thing that was sustainable were just the human interactions, interpersonal aspect of it.
When I got accepted and first shipped out to Moldova, I kind of had just sort of that, I guess you can say that general new, fresh Peace Corps volunteer type of mentality where, you know, I was so optimistic and so idealistic. I thought I'm going to go to Moldova and, you know, make all these great relations and, you know, have a huge impact on all these lovely Moldovan children. And, you know, naturally, as you get into your service, you're faced with the realities of, you know, like what we see in the news or, you know, read on articles online or something, especially in terms of like, you know, the capacity of the country that you're working in and, you know, just the limited resources they have, the cultural norms, the customs, you know, that in itself is a huge culture shock. And so by the end of my service, I still had kind of that idealistic, optimistic attitude, but in a much more realistic approach, if that makes any sense. And what I mean by that is I realized, okay, I'm not going to save Moldova. I'm not going to, you know, make all these kids learn English or, you know, encourage them to, all of them, you know, to, you know, make these necessary reforms that their country needs. But I thought if I could at least just get through to one or maybe two students, even just that would be a success in my book.
My bachelor's is in journalism, so I was planning to be a freelance writer for a bunch of international publications. But, you know, just during my service, I fell more in love with intercultural communications and development and just that mutually beneficial relationship of, you know, helping people and they help you grow. And that was, you know, I just wanted to be more involved hands-on in the world of international relations. I think it's kind of hard to say any of those are more important than the other because you need all three of them to work in tandem. In order to achieve all three Peace Corps missions, you need sustainability at the root of it, but you can't have sustainable development without cultural exchange. And that's already a part of public diplomacy because you have that intercultural communications aspect. So you need all three of these, you know, to work together to have sustainable projects and to have the success of Peace Corps.
Definitely felt like sometimes I was put on a pedestal. There were assumptions made that I had knowledge and expertise, just I think based on where I was from and the way that I look. And I also remember a lot of self-deprecation of Panamanians. It was commonplace to make comments about how they were disorganized or, you know, they couldn't get get their act together, and if like they were more like Americans, then things wouldn't be the way they are. And you know, that wasn't just like once or twice. It was pretty common to hear comments like that. I wasn't a seasoned teacher. I had done a little bit of classroom teaching before I went to Panama, but I didn't, you know, I was coming in to offer coaching to teachers who had 20 years of experience teaching in a Panamanian classroom in that education system, and the methodology that I would be teaching, my counterparts sometimes would try it and it wouldn't work. And the assumption was that it was their fault and not mine, when it's like, I'm the one who taught the methodology. But the assumption is because I'm coming from the US that they're doing it wrong. There's history between the US and Panama, between the US military and Panama. These things were mentioned kind of in passing during my training, but they weren't explicitly connected to the ways that I think people may behave around me and the way people may view me, and the way that they may view the organization and the government that I represent, and those are conversations that I feel like I'm having now at AU. Sometimes it seems like maybe there's just not enough time to fit that into 10 weeks. And a part of me recognizes that. And another part of me feels like those are like really important conversations that need to be had. And, I remember there was like an Instagram account that started a conversation about the white savior complex and how Peace Corps is perpetuating it. And apparently this is a conversation that's not just happening in Panama, but it's happening all over the world. So, when that happened, it really caused me to kind of reflect a little bit. And, in long story short, I think that it's a conversation that needs to continue.
From my experience, being in the Eastern Caribbean and not having an ICDEI committee to really tackle those issues, and then also having the majority of our cohort as white people, there were a lot of things that needed to be addressed. And especially, with people if you don't do the research into the country you're going into, and you don't know the historical backgrounds with colonialism and even just attitudes about colorism, it's very easy to kind of see why this may or may not even be a big deal because you have good intentions. And I think one thing that really happens is most people join Peace Corps because they have good intentions and they want to save the world, and I think Peace Corps is the way to do it. And it's fine to have good intentions, but I think it's really important to recognize the impact that you have and how you go about expressing those intentions too, because really and truly, no other country needs anyone to save them. They can save themselves. You can help them save themselves and give them tools and resources, and that's fine. But you're not there to do the work for people or to do their thinking or their growth, because ultimately there isn't one way to do things. And especially with people coming as Americans and, young college students that probably don't have an expanded worldview, which just statistically, that has been the majority of Peace Corps volunteers. You're coming with one attitude that is a very westernized attitude, and that doesn't make it the only way or the right way. And just because I grew up doing things this way, so if someone else is doing it, it doesn't sit right with me, so it's wrong. That, I think that is an attitude that people have recognized throughout their service and have, been working on. And I think it's something that Peace Corps is working on to address. More and more countries are developing these committees. Every country doesn't have one, because they also want volunteer buy-in to facilitate these conversations and make it happen. And honestly, not everyone knows how to have those conversations too. But I do think that it's an effort that they're trying to correct.
I don't think that we covered it enough. I think it was brushed upon maybe in one or two sessions, which is about less than an hour long. And we would talk about things like microaggressions, which is within the volunteer community. And then I think the other time was, how you're perceived as a volunteer, but it was never there was never explicit times when they would say, for example, like there was Black volunteers, and there was never like a time where they told the Black volunteers that they would go to this country and they would not be like accepted as like who they are. They would be accepted as just another white face in like a Black community, and or even on the other side perceived as they can't help us also because they're Black and we're Black. So it's like, so we wanted someone else type of thing. And it's like, so I don't feel like people were prepared for that. I don't know if they're like, personally, I don't know how we would prepare people for that unless it was said explicitly and directly to people instead of maybe just brushing over.
Just the general worldview of what an American looks like because of movies and media that people consume. Like speaking on my experience, being in Eastern Caribbean in a primarily brown and Black country, I identify as Afro-Latina, and I don't identify as African American. I am Black, and that's fine. But one thing that kind of happened was, because a lot of people thought that Peace Corps volunteers are mostly white people, I would have someone say like, they have Black volunteers. Like, why is this the first time I'm ever seeing that? But I think there's two sides of that. And it depends on how the individual wants to be treated. Do you want to be treated the same way as other volunteers, or are you specifically going to this place for certain anonymity? So one thing that I really enjoyed in my experience was like, I got to take a break from being a Black person in America. I got to just be me and go about my days and do my projects. And, you know, and I think it really also helped me with integrating into my country, because a lot of the times, like in my community itself, they would forget that I was American. And that also helped me with the language development, because everyone was speaking, you know, the Patois and Creole. And it's just like, fine, like, all right. So I'm forcing myself to really immerse in it, and in such a good way, because people just forgot that I was different. And so that it was a benefit in the integration aspect. There were some aspects of it being a drawback, because then like the question of my Americanness did come up every now and again. Like I've had conversations with other Black volunteers in, you know, African countries, and their experience is very different than us, like from the Eastern Caribbean. I know for a lot of us, it was a collective sigh of relief. Like, okay, everyone isn't staring at us because we're Black people, because we're surrounded by Black people. Like no one cares about that. There's something else that's causing, like that's creating attention.
I think COVID's a big one. You know, everything is on hold right now. All Peace Corps in the whole world for the first time have been evacuated and sent home. I have friends who work at headquarters, and I know that they're sort of recruiting, but, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty. So, you know, I've been playing with this idea of volunteers being liaison, you know, to organizations and resources rather than being experts and trainers and capacity builders ourselves. Because I don't think that, you know, we come in with, we get 10 weeks to get this technical training, and a lot of us don't have a background in a given field. I know, like, for example, for the agriculture sector, it was agriculture and business, and half the people in the cohort had just like business backgrounds and no ag backgrounds, and then the other half, the other way around, they just like they lived on farms, they had no business skills, and you know, that seems to be a recurring thing, and so that's fine, just so long as we go into it knowing that our role is not to be the capacity builder per se. I mean, like, you know, our role is to build relations, to understand what people are trying to do, and to try and figure out, to think with them about what is an actual, who are the people who really are equipped to help them reach, you know, attain their goals, and what's a strategy to get to make that connection.
I think a couple other issues would be international views on Americans and foreigners, and how they have changed since the pandemic, and so operating in a new global climate. Of course, the decolonizing Peace Corps, making it less imperialistic, and addressing those questions that I mentioned earlier. Diversity and inclusion with a communal focus on intersectional differences like social upbringing, privilege, socioeconomic status. As we mentioned earlier, how to make it possible for people not only of higher income to join, And just kind of jumping off of what Matt said was, I like using the word facilitator. So like people that are in Peace Corps need to learn more of like how to become a facilitator and not necessarily like, you know, going in with all the answers. And I also see Peace Corps, if we're saying it's a development agency, I see the need for us to run ourselves out of a job, because that's what development agencies are supposed to be doing, is like basically running ourselves out of a job, like trying to find a way so that that people can operate without us, basically. So yeah, that's basically it.
And I think they're all necessary, especially, you know, when we look at public diplomacy and, you know, diplomatic exchange and stuff. You need goals 2 and 3 for it to understand other people and for other people to understand Americans. As a part of a development organization and for aid, you want to hit like that meeting interested countries, their interest for trained men and women. But I think something that kind of gets misinterpreted along all of these lines is that this assumption that Peace Corps volunteers are experts, but really the average 2-year volunteer is a generalist. And then when you look at response volunteers, those people are experts. Like that is the whole point of the response program. Like you don't have to get the 3 months of training for the technical skills. You should know what you're doing. You just need the cultural training and then start passing your skills along. I think just it's the skills exchange that I think that's what gets misunderstood a lot. So it's not necessarily that any of the goals are irrelevant. I think the understanding of the goals is really where the problem comes in. And even something that Rana touched on was like, you know, why is the US in these countries? And then when you look at countries that the Peace Corps has been in for so long, especially since inception, I don't think that their presence means that they're ineffective, because when you also look at the projects that have happened, they're different projects. It's not the same thing for 60 years. They have like their project frameworks where every 6 years, before a project even starts its cycle all over again, they do a review to make sure, like, what are we doing? Like, do we need to change anything? And I hope that this is like what's happening worldwide in Peace Corps. And, you know, there's an ideal, and then in practice, like maybe it's not perfect, but I do think that there is benefit to volunteers being there. It's the expectations. I think like there needs to be a lot of expectation management, you know, on behalf of volunteers and on behalf of like what volunteers are supposed to be doing. And I think that that's something that really gets lost in translation.
There to be this questioning of like, what are our values? Why is the Peace Corps in these countries? And I think it should not only be maybe a Peace Corps community discussion, but maybe like a US discussion, because this is like the US problem, you know?
I feel like it's really good for us as representatives of the US going abroad to do our best to understand these peoples in our host countries, you know, just their way of life, their values, because through it all, and again, this kind of goes back to what I was really proud of in my service, making those close connections with my host community in Moldova, is ultimately you realize we're all just people. Yes, we may have our own different nationalities, our own unique histories, our own different languages. At the end of the day, you know, we have, you know, just the same goals. We share a lot of similar hopes and dreams. And so for me, that particular Peace Corps goal really resonated with me.
I'm definitely the most proud of just creating that home away from home, especially in my country of service, and an experience that I would think would be so, you know, lonely and isolating. Like I found a family there, I found friends, and it was the best 3 years of my life. And just learning about the people around me and learning more about myself, and then also doing my best to be a positive representation of the US.
I think we all know the expression, like it takes like a drop of water in the ocean that makes a ripple effect, or, you know, something to that extent. And that really rang true for me. And to this day, my Peace Corps service, it had a tremendous impact on my life. My particular school, it was a Russian-speaking school. It was with predominantly ethnic Ukrainian students and faculty. So just kind of having that mixed exposure to all these different cultures, I really not just fell in love with the culture of Moldova, but the culture of Ukraine and Russia as well. Yeah, I have aspirations, you can say, to continue work and development in that region of Eastern Europe, and I have full confidence that my studies at SIS will help me pursue those goals.